Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review Wolfpack Season 1, Episode 7. This episode is to be called Lion's Breath, so we naturally assume that somebody's going to be in this episode. And, of course, there is, by the end of it, or by the tail end. I feel that there were certain things that they should have done last week that they did better here. Maybe there was a time problem or money problem or whatever, to have not have done some of the stuff that they did here to have not have done last week. To have me definitely give this an episode of a thumbs up. I thought it was great. We actually have a horror show that is to seemingly be a horror thing throughout. Was really good. So for this episode, we have, of course, Baron being the focus character, and we have some good interactions between both Garrett and Kristen. Of course, with this episode, we also have seemingly Everett, who is to be tied with Baron still. There was a character that I was sad about from last episode that they end up using well here. You'd probably have to put the pieces of the puzzle together to figure out what that means. If you were to have gone on to watch the last week's review, or the last episode's review, I mean. We have, of course, the flashback that actually has a good werewolf transformation. What should have been from last week is to be done better here with a different person. Because we come to find out that there are two werewolves as a possibility in this story. We have the flashback that I think is to be done in a very goofy manner, because it just all of a sudden happens, and I thought that was weird. The story of which that should have been told last week is now technically be told here, and it still doesn't make up for the fact that they should have done this the week prior. On that, I think there is not much for me to go on and say much here. Austin and Luna, I think we have like a kind of quick but a reasonable progression between the two of them, because we, of course, have had Luna, who is to have had a crush on this guy. So why not just like cement that with a kiss? Like I feel like that is not much of a spoiler. Like where it was to assume that from last episode we were gonna get somewhere with these characters with this episode. I think other than that, I think I have to go on and just go into spoilers. So with that said, I'm just gonna go into it. Let me know in the comments below how you felt about this episode. If you liked it, if you hated it, if you're still just like, man, the show is crap, or whatever, however you feel, let me know in the comments below if you want to do so. But other than that, I think it's about that time to just double fire this bad boy up, because I think it's about the time yet again to, of course, go into spoiler time. Spoiler time, it's about that time we're going to spoil this episode. At the very beginning of it, we, of course, have Everett, who is to seemingly wake up with a little bit of Baron off to the side here. I like how they actually are to kind of figure out a way to kind of cover up some of the people in the buff, if you know what I mean, the people without clothes, for specifically this episode. You can almost kind of see quite a bit of the female character later on, but I'll get to that later. So Everett gets up to notice that Baron is to be kind of holding his legs down on the ground. And so Everett is like, well, yeah, you need to remember who you are. your name is, and then all of a sudden Baron freaks out and leaves the room. So Everett goes into the bathroom and he takes a huge no. Everett goes in the bathroom and he's all of a sudden looking into his reflection. He all of a sudden notices that in the mirror the reflection changes and is to all of a sudden be a person that has his back to Everett. So we go on to have Everett, who is to kind of turn his head this way, but is like with his eye, like still looking at the mirror to see that Baron is to be there in the mirror. And so then Everett is to come back and is to just start looking at his reflection again. But then is to notice something is coming seemingly from behind him, as when Everett is to open his bathroom door, he then notices that that Baron here is to start to just burst into flame. So we then go on to have Everett that makes his way through his house and is to like find by his front door Baron is making his way into Everett's house. So Everett, who starts freaking out, is to go on and rush through into a certain room and start hiding. And so Baron is to go on and mention that he can't control it. He seems to be like a passenger in his own body, and he can't control the people that he has to go on and kill every night. Because Baron is to say that's like, well, hey, I hurt people, and Everett's like, no, you kill people. That's what you do. Even though it may not be you that's under control, still, like you're still a murderer. And like that goes on and reminds me of like the Incredible Hulk movie where we would have Bruce Banner that's talking to Betty, and he says like, well, yeah, like I get flashes of things, but it's too hard to process. I don't really like understand what's going on because like the other guy kind of takes control, and so there are certain points when we would find Bruce who's kind of cowering in his shower because he's very confused about what he just saw. But it's some flashback that bizarrely Hulk had. So we would then have Everett, who is to look at Baron by these stairs, and that's when like they're talking about like, well, hey, you don't hurt people, you kill people. And so we all of a sudden are to find like Phoebe's body just kind of making her way down these stairs. And I was like, all right, like we're reusing Phoebe in a very like Spider-Man 2 kind of way of using a character. If you guys remember in the Amazing Spider-Man 2, they went on and they killed off like Dennis Leary's character, but in the sequel, like he's a ghost that whole entire time, just like looking at Peter, and he's just like, and like funny thing about that is like supposedly Dennis Leary, that like that was his idea of how they can go on and use him in the sequel, and he was so happy about being able to be in one of these films because he's like, man, like yeah, like my family or my kids or whatever, they thought I was cool because I was in this film. And so he came up with an idea of how they could write him into the sequel, and they somehow used it. But so we would have Phoebe that is to go on and state, it's like, well, hey, like it goes on and kills, and if anything, like you and your pack should be worried because like you wouldn't want to go on and get it angry or upset And Everett is just like, well, why? And Phoebe goes on the states is it's because like it will come after you and it'll kill you. And Everett's like, wait a minute, like we're a part of its pack. And Phoebe's like, well, it doesn't matter. It can just come up with a new pack, or it can just come up with a new replacement of whoever it kills. So I'm like, okay, all right, like, so like where we are to naturally assume that our pack was to be safe, that is to only have just uh, been a thing of just like, oh yeah, you thought you were safe. Well, boy, are you wrong. So we then have Phoebe, who is to kind of like bleed from her neck and open up her mouth really wide. And so that, of course, is when Everett is to find that his mom is kind of walking through the house. And she's like, well, hey, like, shouldn't you be going to school? Shouldn't you be getting ready for school? So we then go on to have uh, Kristen, who is making her way to Garrett's place, as Garrett is to look at these silver bullets, and he kind of picks one up, and then he sees like the height chart of both Luna and Harlan, and he's kind of looking at it. So Kristen is to come a knocking at the door. Garrett answers, and so Kristen is to say like, well, yeah, like I guess the blur that I saw was to be Harlan and Luna, and Garrett's like, well, yeah, they're going to school. So Kristen goes on and is to talk to Garrett, and the conversation is to have Garrett like try to hide these silver bullets because Kristen is like checking up on Garrett. And so from I guess the crazy stuff that they did the night prior. So while Garrett was trying to hide the silver bullets, we have at one point where Kristen is to give Garrett back this kind of like this slug or whatever, and he's like, "Well, hey, like, this looks like an unusual bullet. Could you tell me about it?" And he's like, "Well, yeah, it's nickel plated." And we go on to have Garrett that is to state that he's a big fan of the Lone Ranger. This is not a relevant character. And I don't know how many times I've gone on in every single werewolf movie that brings up the name of the Lone Ranger. I'm like, this character is not even relevant anymore. It could have been relevant in the oldest werewolf movie that we could have possibly had, but unless you've probably seen the Armie Hammer Johnny Depp film, which that is not that good. Why are we still bringing up the Lone Ranger? Come up. Somebody needs to come up with some other, unless a really good Lone Ranger movie, or it needs to come up with some other thing that every werewolf thing could relate to silver bullets and not have to be a werewolf thing. You could go on and say it's like, well, yeah, like I've read the movie Silver, or I've read the book Silver Bullet, and you know what? I'm a big fan. So I just wanted a silver bullet to myself, or like they could have come up with something other than Lone Ranger. Just it's not a thing anymore. In my brain, it isn't. But people still keep talking about it. So, anyways, uh, Kristen is like, okay, like good way to kind of write you out of that scenario. Good improv there, Garrett. So we have Everett, Harlan, Luna, and Blake, and they all meet up together and don't know if these people even go to school, but they're doing something. So they have the plan that they need to go on and figure out a way to stop Baron from killing. They just need to completely stop him. So Everett is to go on to be like, well, like, we need to hunt him down, and they come up with like more of the plan later on where like Everett and Harland are together and like, well, like, we need to like freeze him and then defibrillate him, and so like that's the plan they're going with. And so they also had figured out that they naturally assume the next person that's on the chopping block, and I guess it's not Garrett, is to actually be Austin. Because I guess since Austin was to have gone on and seen Phoebe being dragged by that sunroof, which I never heard that expression before, or I didn't know it was actually called a sunroof. I just thought it was a window that was on a ceiling. Evidently, it was a sunroof. So, because that's what Austin tells Luna. That it's like, well, yeah, I saw Phoebe being dragged away from that sunroof. Anyways, how many times can we say sunroof? Let's say it one more time, sunroof. So we have the team realizes that Austin's gonna be the new target. We have Luna that talks to Austin about like, well, hey, like, you want to become bait, and Austin's like, sure. If it goes on and gives Austin brownie points towards Luna. It seems since Austin is to realize that Luna is to be having a crush on him. We have Austin who is to kind of make his way finally to ask Luna. It's like, well, hey, like, do you really like me? Like, you might just like the bad boy thing might work for you, but like, is it really working? And so Luna goes, and I know this is kind of out of the order of the episode, but I'm just going with this now. We have Luna that's like, well, it works sometimes, or less than sometimes, and Austin's like, really? Okay. So we have after we would of course have school ending. We would have Blake, who is spending some time with Everett at his place. They're kissing, and so Blake is telling Everett that she needs to leave because she needs to go back to her place because we come to find that Danny and Roberto are going on to just to move out of that hotel room. So we have Everett that is to go on and tell Blake, it's like, well, hey, like, you don't have to like walk all the way there. Like, I'll just go on and I'll drive you, and I'll ask to like borrow the keys. And Blake's like, I don't think you're gonna be able to just easily do that. And Blake is and so Everett's like, no, I'll do it. So we have Everett that goes on to talk to his mother, who of course is to be, heaven forbid, Kendra. There we go. And Everett is to go on and ask Kendra for the keys, and so Kendra's like, well, hey, I'm busy with what I'm doing, and no, you cannot have the car. And Kendra is telling Everett that he needs to go in his room for a number of hours to kind of leave her alone. Isn't there some zombie that he needs to kill? And Everett's like, well, I don't do games anymore because now I'm a werewolf. I don't do supernatural games because I'm a werewolf now. The supernatural games are things that I'm playing with my life. That sounded stupid, but I went with it anyways. So We have Everett that is consistently asking his mother for the keys, even to the point of taking the keys from her, and like Kendra's like, wait a minute, what? No, no. And so Everett takes the keys, and so him and Blake drive off. So we have Roberto and we have Danny who are at the hotel, they're checking out. And so Roberto is telling Danny, it's like, well, hey, if you go, can you go into the hotel room and just get your stuff? Well, it seems that Danny is going to be getting a little bit more than just his stuff. He's going to go on to find a dead, bathing, suited woman. And so we then have all the police and everybody making their way to this location to create a crime scene around this place. So when Blake is to arrive with Everett, we then, of course, have Kristen, who's like, well, you know Everett, or you know Everett. Kristen goes on and is to immediately be like, well, you know, Blake, like, we're gonna have to go on and question you because she's your former best friend. And so if anybody is to possibly have motive, it's probably you from all the stuff that has kind of happened leading up to this point. With Phoebe possibly thinking that Blake had slashed her tires and everything else. So we have Roberto that is to kind of step up for his daughter, which I'm like, wow, that's a surprise. A guy who was a drunk, who it seems is to also probably be like, well, hey, like, where have you been, Blake? That's if I was Blake's dad, I'd be like, well, hey, like, I'm stepping up for you now because you're my daughter, but like, where the were you? Like, I had gone on and asked you for help with Danny, but like, where have you been? Lip locking with some Everett guy that I like. You haven't brought him home to just like have me like clean my gun in front of him, so I can like, hey, don't you hurt my daughter. Anyways, that's not how Roberto sounds, but still. So Roberto comes in and he's like, well, hey, like I'm gonna get my lawyer, and we have Kristen who's like, well, like Blake hasn't really been charged with anything; she's just being questioned, and we would have Blake that's like, well, okay, I'll come in, I'll be questioned, and whatever, and so like as long as like Danny's not really involved in all of this, and Kristen's like, oh, okay, all right, so we have to push forward here. Excuse me. Who, Nelly? It's getting late. It's getting late into the hour for me. So I apologize for my yawning. Anyways, is there anything that I forgot about at this point? Till we get to like the big hurrah hurrah. No, I cover the Luna Austin thing. I think everything else is technically good. So let's get to the Garrett and Kristen thing, and then we'll go on to the big fight out, the big like Austin Luna, and like getting to the wrapping up of this episode. If there's anything that I did forget about, that is to probably have easily happened. You could also let me know what it is I forgot about so I can rebuttal in the following week. But anyways, we have Kristen and Garrett that are to make their way to that door, of which that Kristen was to say that the security guy never came, even though she was to have been in that place before. So Garrett and Kristen go to that door, and so it's locked. So Kristen's telling Garrett, it's like, well, you probably have to just, like, really just get in there and break the door open yourself. So Garrett breaks open the door. I'm like, okay, here's where Garrett is probably going to die. But it doesn't happen. So Garrett goes in there to see that all the dead bodies, and there's supposedly like 18 of them down this hole. And so they even go further to look at the bodies, as Kristen had asked, like, well, what's that sound? And Garrett's like, well, it's all the flies from all these dead bodies. So we have Kristen, who, of course, is calling this in, and Garrett is refusing for her to do so. And Garrett's like, don't do it now. And Kristen's like, why? And Garrett goes on and tells Kristen, it's like, don't do it now because I feel that there could be some things that is to come to light from both Harlan and both Luna, and like I don't want that to happen just yet. And so Kristen is like, well, hey, do you know what did this thing? Like, is it a person? And Garrett's like, well, yes and no, because silver bullets. So they figured out the whole plan. They had Cody to go on and give them the epinephrine that they needed, the adrenaline shot, and they, I guess they didn't exactly need a defibrillator. They could have just gone on CPR'd him, but anyways, we have Austin and Luna that are kind of looking on, waiting for the werewolf to come. And so what happens is like Austin is just kind of talking about him just still being an a-hole and so on and so forth. So, and that all he needed to go on and do was to agree to this for Luna to like him, and so on and so forth, that he would have probably done this a lot sooner, yada yada yada. So we have the werewolf who is to show up, and so we have Luna that's like, well, hey, you gotta hit me. And we have Austin's that's like, dude, I'm not gonna hit a woman. Like, no, like, this isn't gonna work out. So we have Luna that just hits Austin and does it multiple times. I wonder how many takes that took. Hopefully just the two that she just pa. So instead of Austin going and hitting Luna, he instead kisses her, and that's what triggers the wolf to go wild. And so Austin's like, well, I guess that might have been worse, I guess. I don't know. So they're running off, and so you come to find that they're locking this door, and you continue to see them just kind of getting out of there. And then, like, the werewolf kind of runs around to figure out another way to get to Austin. And then we see somebody running with a gray hoodie, but we come to find out that that is actually Blake with the, I'm assuming, scent of Austin's hoodie. And also the fact that, like, this Blake is to be completely covered up. And so she's just covered with Austin's scent running. And of course, she has the speed power. So she, of course, is running, and the werewolf is chasing after her. So we go on to, of course, have Blake that runs into the freezer, because that was their Grandmaster plan of like, well, yeah, there's this freezer that we can go and put this werewolf in, and it can get pretty cold in there. So yeah, that's the idea. So Blake gets in the freezer, and then when the wolf shows up, we have Blake who's to show her teeth. Then we have Everett who is to go on and growl and show his teeth, and is to go on and kind of grab onto this wolf. and the wolf is to grab onto Everett, and we go on to have Harland, who is to shove this gurney thing into the werewolf. And so what eventually happens is all the wolf pack ends up getting out of the freezer, tries to close the freezer, and they're trying to hold it off because the alpha wolf is fairly strong, or the werewolf is to be strong. So I realize I didn't get to the flashback. I'll get to that with Kristen and Garrett. I'll get back to that. I realized that I forgot about it. So, and I also forgot about the flashlight thing. But we'll get to that because I kind of quickly grazed over that. So I'll get back to it. I feel like I should leave that last anyways because it's interesting. And so we had Harland, who is hearing the heartbeat of the werewolf, and it slows and then it stops. So by the time we had Cody, who was to give the guys the shots of epinephrine, 3 of them, we also had both Harland and Everett, who were to have them go on and dip this knife into the silver and be like, well, hey, like, if you need to go on and have this as a weapon, then here you go. So we come to find them trying to revive, of course, Baron here. And we had at one point where Luna was talking to Garrett. And Luna was talking to Garrett about how that whole myth of stating Harlan's name was to have worked out. Maybe there was some kind of way or some kind of myth that you can turn a werewolf back into its human self. And we would go on and have Garrett, who's like, well, yeah, the only way you can do that is to kill a werewolf. And that's how they got the idea of like, well, hey, like, we can just kind of like kill him briefly and then defibrillate him or CPR him and get him back to life. So we also had like Garrett, who was talking about how like there were so many myths that there was a like one myth where you had a number of daughters, and once you had a son, then that would be the werewolf. Bunch of dialogue there. So when Baron, it seems, is to finally come close to becoming 2, Austin is to grab that knife and is to stab into him and kills him. And I was like, all right, like, how is this probably going to backfire? Where if this is not a killing blow from this werewolf, then there is going to possibly be another werewolf out there to go on and be coming after this pack, because that's probably going to be maybe what's going to lead up to the 2nd season. So that dialogue between both Kristen and Garrett that I forgot about. So they head into that doorway where Garrett is gonna like break through it. So Garrett is to go on be in front of Kristen, and so Garrett asks for Kristen's flashlight, and she hands it to him like, well, I hope you give me that back. So they make their way, and we have at one point where Kristen is to go on and ask Garrett, it's like, well, hey, you never asked me about how my husband was to die. And Garrett's like, well, I didn't think it was good taste to go on and ask. So Kristen goes on and states that her husband had died because of a fire that her and her son had been involved in. And so I was kind of curious if that had any real connection to this flashback of a son and maybe possibly a Baron. Because what we see here is we have Malcolm, the guy that we were, of course, to have that story from, of the emptying 50 rounds into the werewolf, and it did nothing, which you never really saw them have one lick of a gun in this episode. They had axes, but I didn't see a gun anywhere, or a rifle or anything, so I don't know what they were talking about. I don't know how they had so many bullets from nothing, it seems. So we had Malcolm, we have Nyx, Quintero, and Rizzler, and Harper. And so all these guys are to run away from the werewolf that had been caught on fire, and then they try to put so many bullets into it. So whatever was said from Malcolm's story from last episode was to be the continuation from that. And so by the time that we go on to have these guys trying to make it to the ridge to get the heck out of there, they realize that they are to hear another wolf that is to supposedly be that other werewolf's mate, because this wolf is to be like the normal wolf. It is to be like a bitten kind of situation where it looks like this werewolf is just to be another wolf. So the wolf goes on and changes back into seemingly human form, but it's not quite fully transformed. So I'm like, okay, I guess that can skip around the fact that we don't want to do too much with the CGI in this episode. So we have to kind of do like a mid transformation kind of thing. It's very weird, like as if we are to have gone into like the end of the very first Underworld movie, where the one guy is to go on to be half vampire, half werewolf, and so it just looks like some uh, like darkened skin person that seemed to be super powered. It is what it is. So we have the girl that goes on and just starts to rip through all these guys, and we luckily have Malcolm that kind of gets out of here. And so we come to find that like the werewolf person is to kind of fall onto the ground and is to start to turn human again. But of course, we can't really see much of the real the goods of this, or the glory, as I am to more say, for this girl, because it's to not be a rated R show. So we would have to draw the conclusion that we would naturally have to assume that Kristen, because she had this flashback, would have to have been this werewolf. But I think there could be an interesting story here. I think we could have actually gone with another character possibly being this werewolf, but it would probably have to be Kristen, because it's the only thing that rationally makes sense. But I don't know. It would be kind of cool if it was actually, you would find out the whole entire time it'd just be like maybe it was Prisha, or maybe it could be somebody else where you're thinking it could be an ally, and they're like, oh no, like, excuse me, that it could have been like somebody that isn't Kristen, and Kristen is still just a normal human being. But I guess that would have to just kind of play out in some way. But again, why wouldn't the Baron thought that Kristen would be in his pack if Kristen was a werewolf? And when Kristen is to go on and talk to this werewolf about working together, why wouldn't they have known one another if Baron is to technically go on and be the kid who was to have been in that fire I don't know, like reasonably we can go in a number of directions here. But either way, I think it's about that time to say that it's time to just get out of here so I can put this out. I'm trying to think if there's anything that I possibly had forgotten about, and I'm scratching my head, just literally. I think I covered everything, so let me know in the comments below how you felt about this episode or anything that I forgot about. 'Cause I think it's about that time yet again. Uh, let's go into just saying goodbye. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.